I have an obvious statement for you, and that is that we live in the midst of all that is human. Some of it's very enjoyable, some of it something we can rejoice in, and some of it is, well, let's just start with unpleasant, a real struggle, a pain. We live in the midst of that too. We see that in the readings today in the first book from the prophet Ezekiel, where the Israelites have been taken away, their city destroyed in Jerusalem, they're taken to the Babylonian town, and they've been there in captivity for a long time. And they're pretty dispirited. So they're kind of struggling. And we see that also in the gospel with Lazarus. He was sick for a while. I imagine you've been sick. Maybe some of us, like me, have been sick with the flu for a long time, and you think you're going to die. You can't imagine what it is to feel healthy again. And so there's the sickness, but then sometimes people die. And that's a struggle, a real painful kind of a thing to go through as well, when we lose a loved one. So we live in the midst of all that is human. At the same time, which might not be so obvious, we live in the midst of the divine as well. Anybody who went through and learned through the Baltimore Catechism, you know the answer to this question. Where is God? God is everywhere. Isn't that wonderful? But sometimes it doesn't seem like that, does it? It doesn't seem like God is everywhere, especially in the struggle. Our faith tells us that, and it's something we need to remember and need to count on. And it's something that God does something about when we're struggling. For example, to the people who were in the Babylonian captivity, he sent Ezekiel to them, and he told them to say, "Open your graves, O people, and I will make you rise from them, O my people." And he went on to say that I will put my spirit within you. And in the midst of their struggle, they had some hope that God had not abandoned them and that God would bring them out of there, which indeed he did. He brought them back to their country, not too long later. Or when we're in the situation of Lazarus, when we're kind of locked behind a stone, maybe we feel like we're dead in the water, dead in life, we need to hear somebody say to us, "Come out." Because God is not satisfied with anything less than life. So he calls to us, come out from where you are, from the tombs, from those places where we have been held captive. And sometimes we do that to ourselves. We bind within us some of the things we don't want anybody to see or things we don't want to deal with. So we just kind of hold them in there. And Jesus says to us, come out. And we might hear that call, but as we see in Lazarus, we can't all do that by ourselves. So he says, come out, and then he says, untie him and let him go free. Because back then they bound people with cloth. So they said, untie him and let him go free. And that's what we need too. We need people to help us, not only when we respond to the come out, to help us to be unbound, set free. An example for that might be when a person is grieving. I know many of us in here have grieved. And when we're grieving over the loss of something, hopes that have died, things that we struggle with, and it's not like it used to be. My whole life has fallen apart. Or even worse, when somebody has died, someone we love, and we're disoriented. And I know that we need to spend some time alone. to kind of get our bearings again. I know that. But sooner or later, we need somebody to come knocking at our door and say, come out, and I will untie you. We don't need to say that, but it's what we're doing. But I invite you, let's go out for lunch, or let's take a walk, or let's talk. Come on out and let's talk. We need somebody to get us out of there and to help us beyond where we are. Or if we see ourselves behind the stones and obstacles that we have created ourselves, the sins that we've committed, the ways that we have offended or hurt somebody else, and we need to be forgiven. We need somebody to say, I forgive you. We need to come on out, and they set us free by that forgiveness. We need to get there. You just kind of think of the times maybe when you struggled with that. If no, you really messed up. How do I get out of here, this dark tomb? We need to ask for forgiveness and be forgiven. And then at other times we have been deeply offended, and we need to reach out to the person who has offended us, and somehow we have to come to the place where we say, I forgive you, and set them free. A whole number of times, people have said to me, I just can't forgive. And sometimes I've said this to them, who is your lack of forgiveness hurting? So they think about it for not too long. Who is my lack of forgiveness hurting? What do you think they say? Me. And I go, now that doesn't cure it, but it lets us look at it differently. We're not holding in our minds that other person bound. We're binding ourselves up because forgiveness really hurts us. And when it's hurting us, we can go and hurt others, but it's likely not the person that we're not forgiving. We need to set them free. Sometimes we need to receive it, and sometimes we need to give it. There's a story I found that, so far as I know, is true. It's about a young woman who was asked to go and tutor a child in a children's hospital. So she went in there the first day, and what she didn't know was the child had been badly burned and was in a decent amount of pain, and he was conscious and awake and all that, but not all that communicative either. He was kind of really, really bad off. And so she tried to tutor him, and she stumbled through the English lesson, trying to help as best that she could. But she said, I was kind of ashamed of putting this child through this senseless exercise. Why? The next day she returned to the hospital, and the nurse asked her, she said, what did you do to that boy? So the young woman started saying, well, I'm really sorry. I didn't know he was burned. I didn't know why I was in here. Then when I saw that, and then I'm really sorry. And then Kurt says, whoa, wait a minute. You don't understand. His entire attitude has changed. It's as though he decided to live. He's a completely different person in his attitude. A few weeks later, when the boy was more able to be conversant and more able to speak, someone asked him about that, and he said, well, with joyful tears he explained, now I figured they wouldn't send a tutor to work on nouns and verbs with a dying boy, would they? Got some hope. Woman didn't even know what she was doing. We live in the midst of all that is human. But even more importantly, we live in the midst of the divine. We need to be not in the flesh, although we have flesh. We need to be in the Spirit that gives us hope, that takes the stone away, even those of our own making, and enables us to live again. Sometimes we receive that gift. Sometimes, even unknowingly, we give it to others. But we are all there to live in the Spirit and in the life that God has given us.